All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go over some trends in the EEO filings that um, have have occurred in the last year here, and I believe I'm sharing a presentation that hopefully everybody can see. Thank you, Julie. Um, so what happens once a year? The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission releases a report. It kind of gives a big summary of all the charges that have been filed in the last year. And the report is pretty much current through September of 2024. And it identifies some trends that have been kind of picking up steam over a number of years now. And what I'll do is kind of go through what the report had to say in terms of the filings that have been coming through, the charges that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has seen. Talk a little bit about what I believe are some of the drivers of the trends, and then kind of wrap it up with some takeaways and best practices to try to deal with the reality of what types of charges are being filed with the EEOC, and this all flows down to the state and local level as well. So first, what stood out to me from the report is that discrimination charges themselves continue to rise. So they were up another 9% year over year, which is a continuation of a trend that has been occurring over the last number of years. And race discrimination charges are up, sex discrimination charges are up, disability discrimination charges are up, age discrimination charges are up, discrimination based on color are up. It's just an across-the-board increase of filings with discrimination charges. And to kind of put it in perspective as to the trend, Mark, I went back and looked at the 2021, where we were in 2021. And since 2021, discrimination charges are up 44%. Now, that may be because there was a downtick during COVID, but it's still a pretty significant uptick in discrimination charges overall. And what was kind of interesting from the report is that religious discrimination charges are down and retaliation charges are down. And I think on the religious discrimination issue, that's probably because we saw a big increase of religious accommodation claims related to vaccine mandates. And I think that's probably a snapback effect as those mandates have lifted in a lot of private organizations. Religious discrimination charges have fallen, although that may be a trend that kind of goes the other way with a relatively recent Supreme Court decision that makes it somewhat easier for a religious discrimination claim to proceed. But religious discrimination charges are down, and retaliation claims generally under Title VII are down. And just overall, all discrimination charges, they're down by like 4,000 charges, which is surprising because from our experience, most charges include a retaliation claim in them. But don't discount retaliation charges because they still are the number one claim that is filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission by a lot. It's 42,301 were filed over the last fiscal year. So turning to kind of what I think are some of the drivers of this trend, as I think through what's really kind of causing an increase in discrimination charges, I really think, the increased media attention to diversity, equity, inclusion really has educated employees on their rights, have made discrimination issues top of mind for employees. And as I really listen to, read about, how the media portrays diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's really easy for individuals, employees to kind of have a takeaway that there is, if they're in a work environment that might not be meeting the ideal portrayal of a diverse and inclusive and equitable work environment, that in and of itself creates that they're being treated unlawfully, and that, if it's not a fair workplace, if it's not an inclusive workplace, if I don't feel heard, that I have legal claims that I'm being discriminated against. And I see that a lot as I'm working with employers where employers are getting broad-based claims of harassment, of discrimination. And when you drill into it and they do their investigations, the takeaways from me as I'm advising them is that you've got a manager who's not, very good at what they're doing and leading others and running a work environment, a workplace, but not necessarily that there's any sort of discrimination or unlawful harassment taking place. And that's why I kind of think that because of this broad media exposure and this trend in workplaces to really put a premium on diversity, equity, inclusion is leading to an uptick in claims. And so I think that's probably a big driver of it. The other thing that I think through as I see what's driving this is the electronic interactions that people are having. We've got Snap, Slack, Teams, chats, social media, all these different platforms now. You've got all sorts of emojis. It leads to opportunities for mischief, for bad acts, and for misunderstandings, right? I can't tell you how many different charges I've seen that have involved the use of emojis and how easy it is for someone to misinterpret or, an emoji and what it means and what the person intends when they send it. So I think that has a lot to do, is probably a driving factor. The other thing that's going on, as layoffs happen, as terminations happen, charges go up. Every time there's a downturn in the economy, charges go up. And with, the impact of tariffs last year on certain industries, even though the unemployment rate was relatively stable, in certain industries, there was an uptick in layoffs, an uptick in terminations. And I think that just naturally lends itself to increases in charges. I think 60% of all charges result from layoffs or terminations. So that's probably a driver, given the increase in firing and layoffs. When we have different return to work policies where people are being brought back to the office, that human interaction inevitably leads to discord and people not getting along. And if people don't feel like they're being treated properly, that can lead to charges as well. And then, we have the workplace functions are back, business travel's back. The more time people spend together, the more time people can offend each other. And I think that's probably a driver of it as well. And so when I kind of stop and think through, okay, if this is what's driving it and this is what we're seeing, what is some of the things that a wise employer can do to try to minimize, the likelihood of claims in your work environment. I think first on my list of things to think through is, reviewing your EEO policies. This is like basic blocking and tackling. What I see a lot of times are policies that, are not user-friendly, they're not clear, they're not easy to read or easy to follow. And I think that's a mistake. I think you want to have a policy that really is digestible for your rank and file employees. And so I would really kind of look at your policies from that lens. Is it too legalistic? Did ChatGPT write it? Or is it something that everyone can understand? I also think that employers make a mistake in their policies when they get out over their skis in what their workplace really is. They may grab a policy that um, speaks about how diverse, equitable, and inclusive the environment is. And if that's not the reality for the place that you're working, perhaps you shouldn't be portraying that to employees. It could be a goal internally, something that you're working towards. But if you have in your policy language that you look around and that's not really you all, I think that's a mistake. And so it's fine to work towards those things, but before you set it forth as a policy as to saying to your employees that this is what we are, I think you might want to reconsider that the language that you're using. And, when I think through policy review, the other angle that I look at is, a lot of times commitments are made in terms of how quickly your organization is going to investigate claims. And if you're overworked, if you don't have the staff to meet those expectations, don't set them in your policy. Be a little bit more general. You can certainly say you're going to investigate, but be mindful that like a strict timeline is probably not the right language in a policy for your organization. Then the other thing I would consider is, your training and you're educating your workforce. It's really important to be mindful that trainings are different from, all employees as opposed to managers. You really have to have different trainings for each sets of folks. And when I talk about training, it's not just here are the employment laws, particularly for managers. It's not just here are the employment laws. I think businesses really drop the ball on leadership training and true management training for their managers. Most managers rise the ranks from being fantastic employees, for being, just doers that get stuff done. And so now when they rise to the level of a manager, they're not necessarily trained up on or have any idea how to lead others. And managing is not just, cracking a whip. It's trying to get employees to have buy-in to the organization goals and mission, values, trying to get employees to be the doers and the fantastic employees that those managers once were. And it's a skill set. And I really think employers kind of promote folks into management and then expect them to be fantastic managers because they were fantastic employees. And oftentimes, fantastic employees who become managers don't really have a lot of patience for newer employees who might need to be trained up on how to become fantastic employees and really get stuff done. And so I would place a premium on training of managers, not just on the employment laws, and that's obviously central. They have to know the ins and outs of employment laws from a basic level so they can stick their hand up and come to the HR folks and ask for help, but also just kind of how to lead people. Because most of the claims I see and deal with just emanate from poor managers, not necessarily discrimination driving it, but a disconnect between the manager and the employee. The other thing I would really focus on is creating a culture of feedback from employees, making it absolutely clear that you want to hear from employees when things go wrong, when they have complaints, and making sure that the employees know that they're not going to be retaliated against, blackballed, or anything like that if they stick their hand up and say, hey, something's not right. The earlier you hear about things, the easier it is to deal with. If problems, bad actors kind of go on for months and years before anything is addressed, it becomes infinitely harder to deal with, and it's harder to get that employee back in a space where they're jazzed about coming to work every day. That really starts with a culture of feedback and making sure that employees know that you really do want to hear from them, good, bad, ugly. You need to know. And so talking and engaging with your employees is something that you should really focus on. The other item is engagement. When I talk about employee engagement and why I think it's so important, it's really because studies show that employees who are engaged in the workplace are less likely to file claims. So if your employees just come in, clock in, clock out, don't come to employee lunches, don't come to voluntary meetings, don't go to company social events, there's more likely they're going to file a claim. So I think it's really important to get employees engaged, find ways to connect with them, to connect what they're doing with the mission of your business, so that they find value in what they're doing. They're not just entering numbers on a spreadsheet, but they can see and kind of appreciate how it really all fits into the bigger picture. Treating them well, obviously, but giving a lot of positive feedback when they do things right. A lot of times I see, employees go through their day to day, and the only time anyone really, knocks on their door is when something's going wrong. And I think if you train up your managers to really give that positive feedback, so when things go right, employees hear about it, it goes a long way towards getting employees to really commit and lock in to the organization, and feel valued. So I think anything you can do to get employees to really, be inculcated into your culture, I think would go a long way to minimizing claims. Another thing to kind of think through is that responding to misconduct is really important. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need a full-scale investigation when you get a complaint of something that may just be a misunderstanding, but making sure that you have a touch point with the employee that brought forth the claim, so that they know that you've heard them, making sure you have, kind of a circle back with them so they know what kind of your conclusions of the claim are, or the issue is. And it's really a delicate balance. Some employees have unrealistic expectations. John Smith made me, did X, Y, and Z. You need to fire him, and it may not be a fireable offense. And you need to kind of work with that employee to get them back engaged and move forward. But responding to misconduct, I think, is key. This is, really near and dear to my heart, just eliminating unforced errors. There's, the biggest things I see is the documentation. The Friday, 5 o'clock, my phone rings and we've got to fire somebody. And now we peel back the onion, and we've got 18 years of impeccable annual reviews. And it's because, oh, well, they've been a mediocre employee. I don't know why the manager did that. But we got to get them out of here. That's just an unforced error. The managers, everybody wants to be liked, but management is not all about being liked. It's being fair, honest, and giving timely feedback. So really work with them on the documentation. Legal compliance. Don't drop the ball on things that are, obviously a requirement. If someone asks for an accommodation that's absurd and you can't, disability accommodation, you can't do it. No rational person would grant it. Do the interactive process. Don't just jump to the end. Document your interactive process. And these are just, skipping over those things are just unforced errors that are going to come back to bite you. And the final thing is, review your recruitment process. Every once in a while, just stop and pause, particularly when you have a bad termination or a bad employee and an exit. Figure out, what were some takeaways? How can we do it better? how can we hire more people that really succeed in our organization and try to minimize the chance of bringing on those that seem to fail. And if you kind of focus on those things, I think you'll increase the chances that you will not ride the trend upward in claims. So I will turn it back over to Jesse.
Thank you, Mike. We did have one question that asked if you could say a little bit more about the religious accommodations that you mentioned at the earlier part of your presentation.
Yes. So there is a trend amongst the current Supreme Court to be very mindful and protective of religious rights. And there was a case involving someone at the United States Postal Service recently, and there's the level of burden that the employer has to demonstrate to deny an accommodation was addressed. But overall, the court really is placing a premium on respecting religious rights, and I think that coupled with the Trump administration's priorities that they're really focusing on, in all likelihood, will lead to an uptick in religious discrimination claims. And so that's really what I was trying to focus on. It's just, even though there's a downward trend last year, I would anticipate it probably trends back up given those developments.